and understand light and composition. And we're going to talk about all of that right now. So I'm gonna see if I can screen share here. Let's see. Let me get to this. Can you guys see me still? Here we go. Okay, you should be seeing a big mess, which is my screen. I am going to just leave it in this format here. I know that you can see my notes and things on the side, but I'm just going to leave it just like that. All right, I just want to share some photographs with you and tell you a little bit of stories about each one of these images. And ultimately, this is all going to translate into an assignment for you. I understand that we're going to look at some photographs today. I'm going to give you some ideas, hopefully some inspiration, and then you're going to go out into the field, go out into the world and capture some images and then bring them back to us. And we're going to get together. I'm not sure when, I think in a couple of weeks. And at that time, we'll review those photographs together. So here we go. I wanted to share this particular image with you. It's nothing spectacular, but it is probably the most successful photograph of my entire career. And like what Jennifer had said, I've been here working as a photographer in Santa Maria since the early 80s. It's what I've done my entire life. It's how I supported my family, is through photography, all different types of photography. This particular image was taken in 2006 in Chihuahua, Mexico, at a place called the Copper Canyons. As Jennifer mentioned, I'm involved with long distance running. And I was on a running project in 06 in Mexico, and I was photographing a group of runners and running with them with Tarahumara Indians in the Copper Canyons. This image was a very simple silhouette, basic composition, rule of thirds that we're going to talk about, pulled off a few frames, no big deal. Years later, this image became the cover of a book called Born to Run. And that book, Born to Run, is one of the most important modern running books across the world. And it changed people's idea about long distance running and racing. Anyway, I wanted to show you this because it has been a very successful image, and it's an image that changed my life. And it's amazing, the thousands or maybe hundreds of thousands of photographs that I've made, this one simple photograph has had such an important impact on me in my life. So here's the deal. I'm going to keep this as simple as possible. There is no way that I'm going to teach you everything that I know about photography in the next few minutes, but we can at least focus on maybe 4 or 5 things. That makes sense to me. So this is what I've learned since the 1980s. These are the elements of a successful image. The first and number one most important thing above all is impact. Everything else contributes to impact, but the main thing should be impact. Is the photograph interesting? Do you want to continue to look at it? Does the viewer or the reader of that image, are they engaged? Do they want to continue? They want to try to understand what that photograph is about. The most important thing is always impact. Now, these next things affect impact. Light. Light is one of the most important elements in photography. The word photography is really 2 words, right? Photo and graph, photograph. Photo means light, graph means drawing or an illustration. So what we're doing as photographers is we are drawing with light, we're illustrating with light, we're capturing light. So if you don't have at least a basic understanding and appreciation of light, it's not going to work out. So in order to create an impactful image, you must understand at least some basics about light. We're going to talk about that in detail today. The next thing is composition. Composition is the way that we arrange elements within the frame. The photograph that you're looking at there, it's a vertical picture. The other way would be horizontal. That's the beginning of composing, vertical or horizontal, and then arranging elements inside of that frame. All of these things relate to one another: impact, light, and composition. It all goes together. The final thing is technique. Technique is how you capture that image, maybe the devices that you use, the lenses that you use, the focal length of those lenses. The technical aspect is the image in focus? Is it exposed correctly? What type of post-production work did you do to it, if any? All of the images, or most of the images that I'm going to share with you today, are as simple as I can make it. No exaggerated post-processing, not a lot of filtration or anything like that. Just simple adjustments in either Lightroom or Photoshop. So technique is important, but it's also important to not overdo it. Does anybody have any questions or comments about those four things right there? This is the basis of everything that I'm going to talk about for the next 45 minutes or so. So let's talk about light. So this is a subject that could go on forever and ever, but we're just going to talk about two basic, simple things today. We're going to compare soft light to hard light. Soft light is what you're looking at here. It's diffused. There is a lot of gradation in the shadows, right? There's no sharp lines. There's no start and finish in those shadows. It's a smooth gradation. So for right now, I just want you to see an example of soft lighting. And as we flip through these images, I have 100 photographs to share with you. As we go through each one of these photos, hopefully as you look at them, you'll be able to identify in your mind and say, that is a soft light, that is an example of soft light, or this is an example of hard light or sharp light. And I can tell you how to create these characteristics. In this particular case, it's diffused. The sun is above the clouds and above the marine layer. So those clouds and marine layer are acting as a diffusion. And so it disperses the light, and it's very, very smooth, gradiated, and forgiving. This is the type of light that we typically would want to put on a person's face if we're doing a portrait. Now look at this. This is the exact opposite. So this is very, very sharp light, crisp, defined shadows. There's very little gradation. So if you look at the details, can you see my pointer? Yeah, can you see it? So if you look up here and you can see all of these sharp lines, obviously this, and it's very, very crisp. All right, soft light, which is diffused. This is direct light directly from the sun. How you create soft light or sharp light, it's based on the size of the light source and the distance of the light source relative to the subject. The largest light source that we have is the sun. It's pretty big. It's also very, very far away. And as a result, when you have direct light coming straight off of the sun, it's going to give you these very, very sharp, crisp shadows. This is also from the sun, but it's been diffused through the clouds, making a very, very large light source of light, and it's closer to the subject. Is that making any sense? Okay. So those are just the two basic things. We're not going to talk about color, temperature, or anything like that today. We're just going to talk about soft light, hard light. As we go through these photos, hopefully in your mind you can start seeing that and at least being able to identify it. That's it for lighting for those two characteristics at this point. The next thing is composition. And I know you've all heard this, the rule of thirds. And this is the beginning and most basic thing. As you're looking through your viewfinder or through your camera or whatever it is, I'm sorry, through your phone, whatever it is, start thinking about where you're placing elements. Stop thinking of things as their literal content. This is a guy with a yo-yo on a beach, but it could be anything. It could be a bottle. It could be a grape. It could be a truck. It could be a person, anything. We're just thinking about objects as shapes, and we're placing them in the frame in different places to create impact and interest. All right. So the rule of thirds is this. You divide the frame up into thirds. Top horizontal, middle, bottom, left, center, and right. And the rule of thirds is you place the subject on or near the place where these lines intersect. Everybody understands that, right? You guys have all been through this. Thumbs up. Yeah. You guys got it? No? It's new? Okay, cool. Well, Joseph, we're going to change your life right here with just this one basic thing. When you look through that frame, think about that. In fact, your camera has grids inside of it. You'll have to go into the settings of the camera, but you can make this grid appear inside of the viewfinder. You can, and with your phone as well. Sure. Set those grids, and then as you're looking and you're composing, think about that. Place the subject where the lines intersect. So either one of these four corners. All right, that's the beginning of understanding basic composition. All right, I mean this is a simple image, just nothing exciting going on here, but it's a cool image, and it has to do with the fact that it's a silhouette and that it's composed pretty well. Okay, so we have light, soft light, sharp light, composition, rule of thirds. There's many other rules of composition, but we're just going to talk about that today. The next thing is texture. Start looking for texture. So when you're out in the field and you're photographing something, you're at the beach, you're photographing the sand dunes, you're out on a strawberry field, you're wherever it is that you are, start looking for texture. And you can emphasize texture with the direction of the light. So who can tell me, just looking at this little image right here, what direction is the light coming from? And is this an example of sharp light or soft light? Does anybody want to jump in? Well, I'll tell you. So this is a pretty good example of sharp light. So you can see that the shadows are very defined. There's very little gradation, right? It just goes from dark to light, very quickly, crisply. How I emphasize the texture here is by putting the direction of the light towards the camera. So I'm shooting what you would call against the grain of the light. And that creates it doesn't create texture, it emphasizes the texture that's already there. By the way, this photograph is in the middle of Death Valley at a place called Badwater Basin, about 4 miles off of the highway 193 in Death Valley, deep on the floor of Death Valley. When you think of Death Valley, you think that it's this flat, hard salt pan. It is in some places, but most places it is not. It's full of texture. Okay? Patterns. So this is something else that you can start looking for when you're out and you're creating photography. Repetition. Our minds like to see patterns. We like looking at the rows of strawberry fields when we're driving down the freeway. For whatever reason, we're attracted to those simple lines. We like to go to the Mission and stand in the hallway and see the pillars, the lines, the repetition. We like simple music, country western music, reggae music. It's all very, very repetitive and simple pattern. And we like that. And so the same thing visually. So when you're out and you're looking for photographs, start looking for repetition and pattern and isolate it and capture it like this. Cool? You guys into this? Keep going? All right. Jennifer, is this what you wanted to hear? Okay. The fifth thing, we're only going to talk about 5 things today. The fifth thing is leading lines. So we're looking for lines, ideally, that draw us into the photograph. So this is a pretty good example of that, right? So we have this will be called an S curve, this long line, and it starts at the beginning of the frame and it goes to the back of the frame and it pulls us through. Okay? And so this is also pretty much an example of the rule of thirds with a vertical photograph. So I position the cyclist pretty much. I mean, maybe I could have bumped her over here a little bit, but for the most part, this is a pretty fine example of the rule of thirds in a vertical composition. Okay, here's the rule of thirds in a horizontal composition. Here it is in vertical. It's really simple. I'm not the smartest guy in the world. In fact, not even close. My photography, our photography, pretty much reflects our personalities. My stuff is pretty straightforward, pretty clean, pretty simple. I'm not a very complicated guy. I'm going to show you a series of pictures now that don't necessarily relate to nature photography, which is this subject, but it does. Okay, so bear with me. I'm going to show you some old pictures. These are old pictures that have had a big impact on me, and you're going to see it as we go further down in this slideshow. I wanted to share this with you. I'm a native of the California Central Coast. This is the house that I grew up in Atascadero, California. My parents are photographers and artists. My dad was a portrait photographer. My mother is a painter and an artist. When I grew up, my father was out in the front yard taking pictures of high school seniors and brides and children, and my mom was in the porch retouching negatives. Now, of course, this photo was way before we got there, but this is the house that I grew up in. All right, what the heck is this? This is one of the most influential photographers in my life. This photographer's name is Edward Weston, and Edward Weston worked as a photographer all over the country in the 1930s and 40s. He spent a lot of time in Oceano photographing the dunes and further up in the Big Sur area. This is an example of the literal content is not so important, right? This is a vegetable. I think this is a cabbage or lettuce. But what is interesting about this is it's just an example of texture. And so, just like my photograph of this is basically the same image, right? The direction of the light is coming towards the camera lens. So he's shooting against the grain of the light, and that's what's creating or emphasizing all of this texture. This photo and this photo are basically the same thing. This picture was made in the 1930s. I saw it in a book in my dad's library when I was like 9 years old. And then 40 years later, I'm still copying the work that Weston did, kind of. Hopefully, this is making sense. This is another one of Weston's pieces, another vegetable. And again, it's just texture, form, pattern. It has nothing to do with photographing out in these preserves, but it does. Bear with me. This is another image of Edward Weston's that was very important to me as my progression as a photographer. This photographer's name is Paul Strand, and he worked at the turn of the century. This image was around 1912, 1915, somewhere around in there. He's from the East Coast. This is also one of Strand's images. Why are we looking at pictures of people walking? Don't think of this as pictures of people walking. Think of this as patterns. Think of this as direction of light. Think of this as an example of very, very sharp light. You can see these defined shadows. Am I putting you guys to sleep with this stuff? This image and this image, same thing. This one was taken in Bakersfield last year, and this one was made, I believe, in New York, in Wall Street, probably around 1915. Again, more Paul Strand, an example of a very, very sharp light source, the direct sun, I guess. A couple more old photographers, and then we'll move on. But this is important. So these are patterns. These are leading lines, just like we talked about with this and this, basically the same. Rule of thirds, right? The subject is placed basically where those lines would intersect. Joseph, are you following me? Okay. Are you falling asleep? Okay, cool. This photographer's name is Dorothea Lang, and she's another one that's super important to me. She was working in around the 1940s, the time of the Dust Bowl and the migration from the South to the West Coast. This image was made in around 1940 in Nipomo, California. This is another image from Dorothea Lang, and I'm not exactly sure where this picture was taken, but I believe it's here on the Central Coast. It's an example of the rule of thirds. It's example of a very sharp, hard light source. This is the most important and most known image of Dorothea Lang. This is called the Immigrant Mother. This is an example of what kind of light? Soft light, diffused light. Okay, this is very sharp and crisp and hard. This is very soft. Trust me, as we continue forward with this, this is all going to make sense, and you are going to be using these ideas as we go forward.
This is a very famous photograph. I've seen it before.
This is a very famous photograph, and it was taken in Nipomo, California around 1940. It's called The Immigrant Mother. This is a classic piece of American art. As I said, I grew up in this photography studio with my parents, and my dad had this book. I call it a library. It was a bookshelf. And when I was a kid, I would go through all of his books, and I would look at these images as a little boy, and it stuck with me. And I'm 58 years old now, and I still look at these images, and they still impact my work, and they're going to impact your work. There was three other photographers I'm going to share with you quickly. This guy, his name is Gowland, and he was a pinup photographer. And so I spent a lot of time looking at these pictures when I was a kid. And then I became interested in studio photography. Like, how weird is that, right? But ultimately, as I grew up, I owned a portrait studio, and some of the techniques that this man used spilled into my work. This umbrella back here is creating a very large, broad light source. So he's putting soft light onto this subject, onto this model. He could have used the light directly from the window, and it would have had a different effect. How weird is this? I'm a kid and I'm looking at this kind of stuff. This is a photographer named Monty Zucker, who was a very, very famous wedding photographer in the 70s. And so all of these lighting techniques I learned from him. Then I met this photographer, Annie Leibovitz. And she's another very, very important and influential person to me. This lighting, I know we're looking at portraits and you wanted to see nature. We're going to see nature. But all of this relates, okay? So this is a very broad, large, close light source, soft, gradiated. This is a very, very sharp light source, and we have all of this texture. This is no different than photographing the dunes or the ocean or strawberry fields or whatever the heck it is you're photographing. It's the same stuff. Soft light, sharp light. Rule of thirds. Okay, is it kind of clicking? It's all related. Then I start taking pictures. So I start by making photographs of children for years. This is what I did.
Beautiful.
The rule of thirds, shooting against the grain of the light. Here's this light source. It's coming towards the camera. It's creating texture down here, placing the subject approximately where those lines would intersect. It's simple principles, but if you're not aware of them, it's never, your work's you're never going to be to your potential, or you're never going to be able to communicate your thoughts without having this basic language. All right, this is how I used to make my living, photographing children. All these pictures you're looking at so far are old, 20 years old maybe. Then I start working in the theater for PCPA, for Opera San Luis Obispo, for Hancock Dance, and I'm working on a stage. And all of those same principles that I learned from my dad's books in Atascadero in the 1970s and 80s are spilling into my work, and they're going to spill into your work too. I added a couple of images here that have nothing to do with any of this, but they're just kind of cool. This is an assignment I did 4 or 5 days ago at the intensive care unit in Marion Medical Center. I'm no longer would consider myself a residential portrait photographer. I'm a commercial photographer, and I do a lot of work for businesses. So anyway, this is stuff that was made just a couple of days ago. You'll probably be seeing these images in some of their marketing pieces soon. But if you look at this image, so here we go. I mean, this is what? This would be an example of the rule of thirds. right? Placing the subject here. All right, let's start thinking more about nature photography. So there's the dunes, the Oceania dunes. This image would be fine without the girl in there at all. But this assignment was to photograph a dancer. So here she is. Again, we're just going to keep repeating this over and over again. This is the basic rule of thirds. There she is, placed right where those lines intersect. The direction of the light is coming across and from behind. That is creating all of this shadow, and shadow creates texture. So next time you go out and you're making photographs, think about the direction of the light. Number one thing is to identify the light. What's the light source? Window, flashlight, headlight, whatever it is, the sun. Okay, number one, identify it. What is the main source of light? Number two, where is it coming from? What direction is it coming from? And what is that doing to the subject? Normally, we're trying to create a three-dimensional feeling on a two-dimensional thing, right? It's just a piece of paper or a computer screen, but we want it to have depth. And so that is happening by the direction of light. Here we go again. So direction of light, the light is coming from behind, it's coming towards the camera. This is a pretty good example of pattern, repetition. And all of this is dust. This happens to be in a place called Ekati. It's a diamond mine in the Northern Territories in Canada, at the Arctic Circle. And I was there photographing a construction project. And this is all dust created by heavy equipment driving back and forth on these roads. And so the sun is setting and I'm photographing the light filtering through this dust. This is a cool image because of the texture, and it's because of the direction of the light. All right, where's this Oso Flaco maybe right here? We just walked out there some evening, and then this is just a pretty good example of leading lines, taking you into the photograph. Texture is caused by the shadows and the direction of light. Anybody have any questions or comments about any of this so far? Is this what you want to see? Jennifer, am I okay? Not going to fire me yet? Okay.
Back on the last picture.
Last picture?
Yeah.
This one?
Yeah. So this is sort of, you put the big ripples down here in the corners so that it's not in the middle.
Yeah. You know, it's okay to put things in the center of the frame, but I think it's a little more interesting and more aesthetically pleasing to move elements around into that frame. Had I put this dead center, I don't know, it might not have the same impact that it does. It's an interesting photograph, right? And I think that this is a more interesting photograph because of where these lines are placed. The rules, the rules are not subjective, right? The rules are the rules, but our interpretation and the way that we apply those rules are subjective. I like comments. When you guys talk, it makes me feel good.
Well, so I have a question.
Ken Hughes, yes, sir.
In talking about leading lines, do
Yeah.
you feel that does the leading line need to lead to the subject, or is it just taking your eye through the picture?
Doesn't need to lead through the picture, Ken. But it needs to, I'd say, you know, use those lines to emphasize the subject. Use those lines to tell the story that you're seeing and you're feeling when you're there. I hope I'm making sense.
Yeah, definitely.
I
Like
took-
that one.
Another
so
thing-
the leading line takes you.
Go
Your
ahead.
eye goes through the picture. It doesn't, like the leading line doesn't end at the subject.
Right.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, sure. So Dorothea Lang's lines pretty much ended at the subject.
Yes.
And this one continues.
Or is it
Despite-
just your personal choice?
Yeah. So it's subjective use of the rules. And then repetition too. So here's this line, and I saw all of this. This isn't like I took the picture and then just kind of guessed later on. While I'm there, I'm seeing all of this stuff from years and years and years and years of practice and looking through the camera. This happens to be in Jackson, Wyoming. And Ken, you might know this lady. It's Pamela Reed, the distance runner.
Oh yeah.
So I took that same picture at Oso Flaco a couple of weeks ago, but I was looking at it from a different angle and it came out not as well.
This image, you made something similar at Oso Flaco?
Yeah, but I was standing, I wasn't right confronting it from the, the center here. I was over on the side trying to get a picture of the ripples, but it didn't show up as well.
Another thing I would suggest too is getting down, getting closer, getting lower, simplifying things. Not a lot of distractions, simplifying things. Another thing is, listen closely to this, because this is another way to create depth and dimension. If you can, photograph from dark, see how it's darker down here, to light. So the front of the frame, dark, back of the frame, light. If you can do that, it helps create sort of a dimension. Dorothea Lang did it here, dark to light. I pretty much did it here, dark to light. Is that making sense? If this was light to dark, it doesn't have the same depth. You guys, there's so much to talk about. Photography is it's an art, it's a science, and it's never ending. And so we've already been talking for 30 minutes and I'm not even, halfway through all of these slides. There's so much to know and to share. So let's see, where were we?
Hey, Luis, just a quick
go ahead,
question.
go ahead.
So for the Oso Flaco photo,
Yeah.
Would you say that the dunes are the subject? And if yes or no, how important is it to have a subject in like a landscape photo?
Well, I'd say that the subject here is just color and texture, the literal content. The dunes, no, not necessarily. Also, I use the relatively shallow depth of field, and we're not even going to talk about depth of field today, but depth of field means the amount of area that's in focus. So I was in focus right here in the bottom third of the frame, and then the focus falls off, if that's making any sense. We can have another discussion on nothing but focal length and depth of focus, or depth of field. So the answer is, what's the subject here? I think the subject is just color and pattern.
Wow, I never thought about it like that. That's really helpful. Thanks.
So look at this one. So this is the same, basically it's the same thing. It's just pattern, color, texture. But this one is the opposite in terms of depth of field. So this is, I'm just guessing, this image is probably 10 years old, 15 years old. This was taken out of an airplane in Los Alamos. So I'm in an airplane. And so I need to have a pretty fast shutter speed. And I wanted to have as much of it in focus as possible. So I'm using a very small aperture or a high f-stop number. So this is probably f16 at 2/50th of a second. But the result is this. You don't need to know that part yet. Just know that it's very much in focus. And the main thing I wanted to share with you here is the idea of a small light source creating all of this texture, all of this pattern is from a very small light source that's giving us these defined shadows. I haven't even looked at this photo in probably 10 years or so. It's a pretty cool photo.
So
Go ahead.
May I just ask something about that, or
Yeah, sure.
comment on that? So one of the things I was thinking about when you were talking about the leading lines is that they seem to mostly appear at the lower level of the image and then they go up and out. But in this one, it seems that not only is there texture, but there are leading lines that are leading the eye and the image in different directions.
This one's all over the place.
And so for me, that's what is rich about this photograph, is that it really, it's like a journey that comes from different directions.
Yeah, I like that. I like what you're saying. Listen, let me give you this analogy. This is simple. This is Bob Marley. This is simple. It's easy to understand and see what's going on. You glance at that, you get it. This is Thelonious Monk. This is like coming at you from different directions. There's more to comprehend here. It's a little deeper. Do you know who Thelonious Monk is? He's a jazz musician from the 60s.
If you don't, you should find out.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't even know why I picked out those two names, but to me, they're opposites, right? So Bob Marley music is very easy, repetitive. We understand it. You hear it. It's simple. Monk is all over the place. So I often think and feel about photography like music. It's kind of the same. This is just a mess, right? This is just color and texture. I pulled this out just as an example of a small light source creating very, very sharp defined shadows.
Love the texture.
Yep. So as you look at this stuff, without me saying it, I want you to be able to go, oh yeah, I'm understanding this. So just, this has a lot of texture, right? Why? And you all know the answer. Here's the sun. This is the source of light. And it's coming this direction. It's coming towards the camera. It's creating all of this shadow, which is creating texture, which is giving this thing depth and dimension. Plus, I go from dark to light. Plus, I'm using the rule of thirds. The literal subject, I mean, this is a raft. The literal subject is an ice chest. Sometimes the subject doesn't matter.
Subject. It's those people that are the subject.
That's what I thought too.
They're out of focus.
That doesn't matter. But look at them. They're holding hands and they're drinking their morning coffee. And
Yeah.
they're in the third.
They're in the third. So the third is here and here. Bonus. But look at this. This is my point from the beginning. This and this, same thing. Okay, this is cabbage. And let me get that back to that. This is rafting. To me, it's all the same stuff, right? The literal subject is important, but as a photographer, when I'm out, I'm just looking at light, direction, shadow, composition. That's it. And it doesn't matter if I'm photographing a person, a boat, a cabbage, an airplane.
Was it
Nice.
an advertisement for that
Lead,
company?
leading lines. This is not rule of thirds. I placed it right here.
It's on
Silhouette.
the lower third.
Sorry.
It was on the lower third.
That's correct. So there would be a line here and here. So it is on that lower third. Simple silhouette, which means that there's more light behind the subject than on the subject. And we're exposing for back here. I want this color to be recorded accurately. And then this, the shadow area, just to fall into dark to make a silhouette. Simple technique. All right. I'm going to just flash a picture on the screen and you guys figure this one out. All right. You've already seen 50 examples of this. What is this?
Into the light silhouette and thirds.
Boom, boom, boom. That's it. You guys figured out my whole,
Wow.
that's it. That's
Kathy,
me.
You are fast.
That's you guys. I just told you all of my secrets. That's all I got. I just shoot towards the main source of light. I use the rule of thirds. And that's it. It's not exactly it, but that's basically it. Santa Maria
Let me
Valley.
ask you, what is your focal point on this? Because they look blurred, and the mountains off to the right looks fairly sharp.
They look pretty sharp on my end, so I'm not sure exactly what you're seeing there, but I used a very large aperture. This is probably f/16, f/22. And the idea was that it should be in focus from here to here. So all the way through, it should be pretty sharp all the way across. This is Cambria Vineyards looking out over the eastern part of the Santa Maria Valley. This was a hard one because I was hired by the man that owns this airplane, and this is his pride and joy. And so there was a bunch of things that they requested, and this kind of relates to nature photography, but so they want to see the Central Coast. This is Port San Luis. Of course, they want the airplane to be in focus. They want the propeller to be turning. They don't want it to be stagnant, and they want to be able to recognize themselves. So that's a lot. That's a tall order. Now I'm in another airplane hanging out the side. We're going about 260 miles an hour. The airplanes are very, very close to one another, and we're hauling ass back and forth across Port San Luis. So this one's dead center. There's no real interesting composition here. And then the light is coming this way, right? So you see where this is. This is Avila, Port San Luis, actually. And then so the light, it's the sun is setting, so it's coming across, creating texture in the water, and having a very sharp source of light also changes the characteristics of the light in terms of color saturation. This is blue, 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 and it has to do with the quality of the light. All right. More of the same. Where's this? Pismo. I've spent a lot of time photographing farm workers in the fields up and down the coast. This is a project for Gladway Farms. They grow gladiolas in the Santa Maria Valley and Goleta. And so this is just another example of rule of thirds. This was a foggy morning, so the light is very diffused.
It's a beautiful picture.
Yes, it is. All right, here's another one. You guys know all my secrets. This is backlit, rule of thirds. This image and this image, basically the same thing. The only difference is this one, I have this element. This one, no. This one is in the Arctic Circle. This one's in Guadalupe. Are these the kind of pictures that you guys are interested in? Here's another, same thing. It's backlit. Diffused light. And simple. I put this in because I want to emphasize the idea of simplifying your work. Get closer to the subject. Remove all distractions. Make it as simple as you possibly can. This is a strong image, I think. This is one of my favorite photographs.
Yeah, great. You got the red of the strawberry, then the hands and the blue. Like you simplified everything.
And all of this texture in this man's hands.
Absolutely.
Hard hands and delicate fruit. As we mentioned, distance running is a very big part of my life, and it always has been. Photography is a big part of my life, and open spaces are important to me. And this next image is a combination of all of those things. This picture is about probably more than 20 years old. It's the very first serious running photograph that I ever made, and it's in Point Sal in Guadalupe. And so even this 25 years ago, I was still thinking of the rule of thirds. I'm thinking of going from dark to light. I'm thinking leading lines, taking you into the photograph. That's an old picture. Probably, I think this is my very, very first like serious running photograph. Same thing. You guys can do all of this. with if you just these 5 basic things: the light, the direction of the light, composition, rule of thirds. Try to create texture by having the light come across the grain, shoot across the grain of the light, shoot into the light, look for patterns, shoot from dark to light. This is in Pismo.
Your previous picture, it was a side light though. That one you had from the right.
Yeah, yes and no. Yes, it's coming from the subject's right shoulder at a pretty strong angle.
Okay.
This one obviously is directly behind the subject. This is from behind them, but from the left. Look at all of this texture that's created here. This is a semi-silhouette. This is in, I don't remember, Boulder, Colorado, maybe? Just
Do you use a polarizer when you take these kind of photos? So no polarization.
nothing. I use a camera and then I shoot in camera raw format. I bring the photos back into, I put them onto an external hard drive, something like that. I edit them. Editing means selecting. Editing doesn't mean adjusting and alterating. Editing means removing, separating them into different folders. Then I open them up in a software called Lightroom, and there I can make basic adjustments. That's enhancement. It's not editing. And then if it needs further work, I can take it and refine it in a program called Photoshop.
That's what I use.
Almost done with running pictures, I promise. Then we'll look at some landscapes and stuff. This is Death Valley. Basically the same stuff. There's the sun, backlit, shooting into the sun, shooting against the grain, capturing all this texture using the rule of thirds over and over. Go ahead.
The run from Death Valley to Whitney Portal.
That's right. This is mile 70 of the Badwater 135. This is the Panamint Valley. Death Valley is on the back of these mountains. This is the Panamint Valley. They're on their way to the Owens Valley. This is in Death Valley. And this is just another great example of a nice leading line, sharp, crisp light, creating all of this texture. Pretty cool, huh? This is in Squaw Valley, above Lake Tahoe in the background there.
I love this photo.
Yeah, that's a pretty cool image.
Yeah.
This is the finish of the Western States 100 on the track in Placer High School in Auburn, California. I think you guys are seeing a pattern. I pretty much have just doing the same thing over and over again for the last 30 years. Shooting against the grain of the light creates this texture, shooting from dark to light. Now that I look at this stuff, man, my work's boring. This was just a few days ago at Folsom, California, photographing for an ad. And this is a backlit, just a beautiful, simple photo. This is about 3 days ago up in Tahoe. And this is another ad for a clothing company. Diffuse light, no shadow. It's just simple diffuse light using the rule of thirds. This was in Los Alamos a couple weeks ago, again, photographing for a clothing company. More of the same. A couple days ago in Truckee, California, right behind the train station in Truckee. Rule of thirds. Rule of thirds. This is a place called No Hands Bridge. It's on the American River outside of Auburn, California.
You shot that in a black and white?
No, I shot it in color with camera raw and then converted it to black and white in Photoshop.
It's beautiful.
Yeah, it's a nice image. This is for a company called Fleet Feet. They're a shoe company. They own specialty stores, running shoe stores. This is gonna be a mural size, image in one of their stores. All right, so here we go. Let's get to some nature stuff. Running out of time. So yeah, here we go. This is side light. So it's coming from my right, the camera right, coming across these dunes, and it's
If I could
creating
just-
all this texture. Go
Can I
ahead.
just interrupt you for a second? If anybody needs to leave right now, because it's 1:30, I just want to let you know I'll be back in touch with a reminder about different places you can go shoot over the next couple of weeks. And we will reconvene on March 31st, the last Wednesday of the month at 12:30 to critique photos. So don't feel bad if you have to leave right now.
I have just a few more images, maybe 20 that I'll flip through. And yeah, if you leave now, you're going to miss the nudes at the end. So it's up to you. All right. So this is just lines, texture, color. This is backlit. This is at Pismo a couple, 3-4 years ago. So the main thing is that we're flipping through all of this stuff. If there's anything I could leave you with is simplify, get closer to the subject, think about the direction of light, use the direction of light to create texture, and you create texture by adding shadow, and shadow has everything to do with the direction of light. This is a very delicate thing, right? So it's being lit from behind. You can see all of these little fibers here. I hope you can see my mouse. You can see all these little fibers here. This is a good example of rule of thirds.
It's the upper third, you meaning? Where
Yes,
you catch the
that's correct.
okay.
And then I used minimal depth of field, right? So this is out of focus. The background is soft and out of focus. The foreground it is vignetted by this blur, and this is the subject,
An albino.
or the point of interest anyway. This image and this image, basically the same thing,
Oh,
guys.
love it.
This is a Joshua tree. You can do this. We have this all around us all of the time. Ask first, but you can go into the vineyards and do photographs like this using the same principles that we've been talking about for the last hour. Simplify it, get down, get closer, light it from behind, which means in this case, I can't move the light. I can move myself. I can move the camera position relative to the light. Silhouette, just like the guy climbing on the rock. This is basically the same thing. This is using the rule of thirds. I put this here just to show you it's the same picture. This happens to be in Canada. This happens to be in Quincy, California. So this image, this image, this image, they're the same thing, same composition. You know, this is around here somewhere. Leading lines, right? Taking us into the frame. Same thing, shooting against the grain of the light. This image is exactly like that other one with the dust in the Arctic. This image and this image are basically the same thing, right?
What is the green? That's all water. You just got it.
Yeah, it's the water. It's just
Blue
the water. There's like no manipulation here. This is at sun setting at Pismo by the pier one night.
Beautiful.
It's a great photo. All right, you guys can do these kind of images. This exists all around us all of the time. It's just a matter of isolating it, getting out there, simplifying things, seeing patterns, seeing lines, seeing the direction of the light. You can do all of this. This is a little trickier. This is with a drone, so we're shooting straight down, but it's the same thing. We have all of these patterns. You can see all this, the texture created by the light moving through the pylons of the pier. This is up in Cayucas, I think. This is right here, Oceano. You guys can do this. Edna Valley. Is this helpful? Are you guys now? I mean, we spent 50 minutes repeating over and over, looking at the same thing.
But it's wonderful seeing the examples, though. You talk about it, but you can actually visualize it now.
Well,
I mean, I've been taking photographs for 30 years, and I've always heard of the concept of thirds. I've never had anyone explain it to me, though, and it makes so much sense now. And I've seen it actually applied in your photographs. I'm very impressed.
Well, Joseph, hopefully we're going to get back together in a couple of weeks, and you're going to show me examples of that.
I'm going to try.
And again, the literal content, the subject's not so important. Just arrange elements inside of the frame. Use these 5 basic things that I've been talking about, and you're going to see your work is going to change. It's Cayucas. So again, rule of thirds, right? So here's the pier is the subject. The rock balances it off in the background.
Liz, you have a question in the chat. Someone, Anne, was asking if on an iPhone you use portrait mode to blur the background.
I use portrait mode all of the time with my iPhone S, whatever this is. Yes, the answer is absolutely yes. So that's a subject for another day. That starts falling into technique. And what the iPhone is trying to do is replicate what you can do with a DSLR, where you have control over the aperture. The iPhone, we don't really have control over the aperture, but we do have that portrait mode, and that replicates using a wide aperture. So the answer is yes, I use it all of the time. Where is this? Folsom Lake, the Jerome, a few nights ago. Leading lines, that was the main reason I wanted to share that with you. All right, so here we go. This is the last 3 slides, 4 slides. This is what I want you guys to do. Start identifying the light source. Main thing. When you walk outside right now, when you want to finish with this thing, walk out the door and say, okay, what's the source of light and what direction is it coming? And as I turn and move relative to the light, that's going to change the shadows. You know, my perspective is going to change the way that the light is coming across. I'm not saying that correctly, but I think you understand. Okay? Most important thing, first and foremost, photography, 2 words, photograph, drawing with light. If you can't see the light, you can't make the drawing. So go out there and find the light source, identify it. Simplify. Get rid of all of the stuff and make your imagery as simple as you possibly can. Remove all distractions. If it doesn't add to the story, then get it out of there. All right. If there was a kid sitting here and riding a bicycle, that would just ruin this whole thing. So I just want just the simplest, most elegant arrangement as possible. Look for lines, look for patterns. Okay. Identify the light, simplify things, look for lines and patterns, apply the rule of thirds. Go out, do this, get back to me in a couple weeks, show me stuff like this.
Louis, thank you so much. That was excellent.
Thank you. It makes me feel good to hear that.
I've learned a lot.
Did we lose all our viewers? I can't see who's actually on. Are we just down to 4 people?
I know we're still pretty good. Full house here.
Does anybody have any questions for me quickly? I know it's tight, but no?
No
Okay.
questions,
Can I
but
ask one?
I just wanted to say thanks a lot for talking about the subject, because I've been, I don't want to say criticized, but it's been pointed out that my photos don't have a subject, and that's always kind of bothered me. But your examples really show that you can have really interesting photos that have a lot going on that don't have a really definitive subject.
I agree. I agree that this is the deal. When I'm asked to do a job, I want to try to I go there and I want to tell that story to you as the viewer, as the person reading the photograph. I want you to see it, taste it, smell it, feel it like I felt it when I was there. And so your interpretation of whatever it is you're photographing, it's you, it's your story. Tell it. If people don't get it, well, it's okay.
Do you use a flash a lot in your photography?
No, no. I try to use ambient light, the existing light, the light that's there, and then try to position myself in a way to make that light as effective as possible to tell the story. Now, using a strobe, putting a light on the camera, brings the light source from here at the subject. And, you know, I've just spent an hour telling you that I want the light coming from behind the subject.
Right.
This image of this airplane is pretty cool because it's lit from behind. And it stands out, it pops out against that background because it's lit from behind. If I have no way of lighting it from this direction, but if I put light on it from this way, it would flatten it all out and it would not have the same texture and depth. I have a strobe, of course. I know how to use it, of course. I have a full studio with lights. I know how to use them, but my preference is to use ambient light.
We have another question in the chat. Any recommendations for iPhone suggestions for adjustments, such as like tutorials or
well, that's a whole nother subject that we can talk about in depth. I'll tell you what, the iPhone 11s Pro is very, very sophisticated. There's apps that you can put on the phone that simulates aperture and shutter speed, so it can turn your phone almost into a normal camera, where you can make those adjustments. I would suggest that you just get on YouTube and start Googling iPhone photography. There are lots and lots of people out there that will teach you plenty about using an iPhone. I've worked with an iPhone a lot. I've made lots and lots of photos and videos. I've sold lots of photos and videos with my iPhone. Sometimes they'll show up and the customer's like, "Where's your camera?" I'm like, "Oh, right here." And they're like, "What?" "Trust me." And I get it done. The camera, the first thing I said to you, cameras do not take pictures. People take pictures.
So I've got a 10. Is it the 11 that much better?
I don't know about the 10. The 11 has 3 lenses, so a wide, normal, and telephoto lens, which makes it really versatile. It has that portrait mode, which is very, very handy as well.
So
I
does
don't know about the 10, but I'm assuming that they're similar.
Okay.
Any other questions?
Well, I look forward to our next seminar.
Me too. I hope that was informative. I hope that you enjoyed it, and hopefully you picked up 1 or 2 things out of this. Jennifer, maybe I can just send you a list of these 5 things as part of an assignment, and if you could email it to all the folks.
That'd
Sure.
be great.
And
Very
then so that way they'll have a target, a goal to work towards.
assignment in a small window of time. You guys only have 2 weeks. And it would be great if after you go out and test and take some photos, pick out maybe 2 or 3 of your favorite, send them to me via email, and I will organize it for our next session on the 31st.
Great. Thank you very much.
All right, thanks so much. You guys, thanks everyone for showing up. Have a good afternoon, and we'll be back in touch soon.
Thank you. Thank you, Jennifer.
All right. Bye, everyone.
Thank you.